So, can a child obediently slave their way out of a heartbroken relationship with a parent? This is a second commentary video I'm doing on a series of videos by Dr. Kenneth Bailey, extrapolating a Middle Eastern understanding of the parable of the prodigal father from Luke 15. I'm compiling this with an aim to apply it all back to what I see in our current tension in our denomination. The culture clash of proposition and law orientation with relational and narrative power orientation. I named that in the first video that began this commentary series. So it's about 18 videos, 20 videos back. So this is about the second video by Dr. Bailey, and I've put links to both of them in the blog version of this post, and I'll try and remember to put them in the notes as well. At around 225 in the video, he's describing how the insolent son is stuck, and he recognizes that, and he's trying to formulate a way out of the problem. And it's going to be his own plan, his own idea to get out of the problem. And in all of this, Bailey is going through a list of places where we have culturally misunderstood and so misinterpreted the parable, where we need, I love this phrase, cultural revision, his own words, and we need adjustment in our understanding in order to understand the meaning and application of the parable in its original context. And that is an important Reformed principle of interpretation, to begin with understanding it in its own context, which is one of the reasons why seminary students in the Reformed tradition learn some essentials, if not some specifics, about the original languages so that that can be accomplished. But what's been missing is kind of a cultural understanding of some things that are described that are lost because we don't remember the culture. And so Bailey is re-injecting some of those things into this parable and making it clear for us. He's at point 6, where we need cultural adjustment. So the sixth adjustment that he names, and that is about the search for employment. By around 315, the numbers may not work out exactly. He gets to point 7, that this is a self-serving plan, which the boy comes up with. And it's all about him coming up with a solution to the problem for his own sake and his own benefit. I can fix this. It'll be a bit tough, but I can fix this. Bailey says some things about soliloquies in dramas that are worth knowing if you want to watch the video yourself. But he basically points to a soliloquy, a solo speech to oneself, as a way that the hearer can find out what's really going on in the mind of the speaker. At around 423, Bailey emphasizes this desire to eat. I'd like to eat. And he hints here in a very interesting way, again, to a connection with Jacob's story, and then points to a connection later on with the other brother not having so much as a goat to celebrate with his friends. In other words, he expresses a desire for more food also. So it is an interesting, could be a chiastic structure. We don't know. I haven't looked into that, but it's definitely interesting. As I've said before, the connection to Jacob's story and the repeat themes, but then this, that they both brothers at some point want more to eat. Then shortly after that, he talks about how in the West, this moment of coming to himself is where we think he repented. And I remember as a kid hearing that preached in that way. Bailey makes a strong case for the fact that his words do not convey actual repentance, nor do the words Jesus uses to describe it hint in that direction. If anything, they go out of their way to avoid anything that could be tied to repentance. And so by around 5:20, Bailey's talking about this boy is still looking out for himself, and he really has no consideration of others. He's no understanding, it seems, of the damage that he has done as he makes his plan. And so, as part two of his soliloquy in verses 18 and 19, Bailey says he now has the plan fully developed. I'm going to just play a clip where Bailey explains further himself.
Absolutely critical for us to notice that, because he's not repenting. He still is looking out for number one, and that's himself. And this is the problem. Now we're going to take a look and see what the solution is. We will see it. Now you can see it on your screen. And this is the second half of his soliloquy. And he says, I will arise and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no more worthy to be called your son. Fashion out of me a craftsman. And he arose and came to his father. All right. Now, when he talks this way, let's go back and talk just a wee bit more about the phrase, he came to himself. Because of the fact for a very, very long time in the English language tradition around the world, we have decided this phrase means he repented. The only time we have this phrase again in the entire New Testament is in the book of Acts in the 12th chapter, where St. Peter is in prison and he's all chained up and they're going to kill him the next day. And the story tells us that an angel comes to him, the bonds fall off, he gets out of the prison, and he thinks it's a dream. He thinks it's a vision of some kind. And then the angel leaves him on a street corner in Jerusalem. He comes to, and he realizes this is for real. And the text says he came to himself. It has nothing to do with repentance. Hebrew has got a big word for repentance, and it's the word return. The point being that we are far from God, and then we return to God. And the word for repentance is teshuvah. Shuv is the verb, and teshuvah is the word repentance, and it has to do with returning to God. And we can quote from the prophets and the Psalms about the cry of the prophets and of the psalmists that get the people to return to God. Return means, you went here, now you're going to come back. In the little text which we just read, the prodigal talks about going home, and he says, and you heard us, I will arise and return to my father. No. He says, I will arise and go to my father. And then later on in the very text which we read, it says, he arose and returned to his father. No, it says he arose and came to his father.
That is Kenneth Bailey's case for not understanding, not interpreting this plan as repentance. And he points out in the clip to all the reasons why. When we get to around 10 and a half minutes in the video, he the boy decides to execute the plan and to go home and gain employment and training as a craftsman. And Bailey explains a whole bunch of things related to that under his father's blessing. So he's going to ask his father to back him in doing this. Again, showing complete ignorance of the wrong that he has done, the harm that he has caused. Then at around 12 minutes, Bailey starts talking about the three parts to the speech that the boy prepares. And so I'll show a clip here where he explains that himself instead of having me repeat it for you.
But he's going to have to butter up the old man to get the job training. So he decides the speech is going to have three parts. I have sinned before heaven in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Fashion out of me a craftsman. Now, the first two have to be seen in light of the third one. This, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this so that I can get the job training. We'll see how the speech is revised when he gets in the far country. But when when he gets home in the far country, it's a setup to get out of the old man what he wants. The audience knows this because in the story of the 10 plagues, when Israel is in Egypt, Pharaoh is under pressure. You got to call Moses in and chat with him. And he doesn't want to do it, and he doesn't want to do it. And after the ninth plague, it's so bad, he finally calls Moses in. And then Pharaoh says to Moses, I have sinned before heaven and in your sight. Now, is Pharaoh repenting? I don't think so. The audience knows perfectly well that this is Pharaoh trying to soften up Moses to get Moses to lift the ninth plague, and then, of course, he's going to clamp down on them and not let them go anyway. So it's a psychological trick to try and get what Pharaoh wants. And every learned Jew of the kind of an audience that Jesus had, they were the Pharisees, know this. And then the second part of the speech is, I am unworthy to be called your son. And he's unworthy to be called the son, not because he lost the money in the far country. He's unworthy to be called his son because he told him to drop dead. The issue is not what happened in the far country. The issue is what happened in the house before he left. So the first one is insincere. The second one is the right things to say. Now we come for the reason for saying it. Fashion out of me a craftsman. We ordinarily translate this, make me a hired servant. And the word make was the word used for God in the Old Testament when he made the earth. And it means that train me as a craftsman.
So this whole idea of craftsman got me wondering why we in the West assume the household was a farm. It'd be worth some more explanation or exploration. The notion of the craftsman being brought in here, which I had not known before, it's always been interpreted servant or slave, implies the father. And I don't remember Bailey ever explaining how he came to that word, but assuming he knows what he's talking about, which I do for most part, I got to admit there are places where he adds things into the story by way of explanation that to me feel like a bit of a stretch, particularly I guess because he doesn't point to the Middle Eastern custom in it. But this implies that the father could have been a tradesman himself, a butcher, or I don't know if they had blacksmiths then. I don't think so, but a carpenter, a builder, um, any, a repairman of appliance of implements of farming, whatever it is. And so that's just interesting in itself. It's a shift that we might want to keep in mind. And if I understand all this right, like many in that day, most craftspeople would still have had some family land and some livestock. So it's not an impossibility that he was a tradesman with some small farming on the side. So the boy decides he's going to express the desire to learn a trade, and his driving force is that he simply wants to eat better than he has been doing so far. Bailey next returns to what got Jesus telling the three connected parables in the first place. It's always important to remember that that's what's driving what Jesus is saying, and how Jesus is answering the charge of equivalent to unchastity, uncleanness, for eating with the unclean. Remember, that's what Jesus is addressing. And so here's a clip where Bailey speaks to some of that.
The first is The audience has come to Jesus saying, in our conceptual terms, Rabbi Jesus, your doctrine of sin isn't serious. You're willing to sit down and eat with these people. So Jesus, in a metaphorical style, is replying and saying, gentlemen, I understand that you think my doctrine of sin is not serious. Please allow me to explain my doctrine of sin. Sin for me is so serious, it's like a young Jewish boy who tells his father to drop dead, who insists that he take his share of the family farm. He sells it with his father in good health standing on it. He goes in a far country among the Gentiles. He loses the money to them, and he ends up feeding pigs. He falls so low that he even wants to become a pig so that he can eat pig food, but he hasn't got the stomach that can digest the stuff. Audience reaction? Fantastic. This young rabbi has a very clear and powerful doctrine of sin. He is presenting our point of view better than we could have presented it ourselves. Sin for him is so heinous that he pictures this young Jew who broke all the rules of the family tradition, lost the money, and wants to become a pig. All right, so what is the kid going to do? He's going to go home and he's going to work hard and he's going to save his money and he is going to pay the money back. And the audience says, yes, that's exactly what he's supposed to do. Not only does Jesus understand sin, Jesus understands salvation. Not only does he understand the problem, he also understands the solution. So in their mind, what is going to happen is the prodigal is going to go home. When he gets home, they're going to spot him, and the people will drag him to the town square, and they break the big pot, and he is cast out. And finally, after a few days, he manages to get in the front door of the house and have a very embarrassing discussion with his father. And he says, Dad, I know you have no reason to trust me, but please, just once more, send me to the next village to so-and-so, the skilled carpenter over there, and have him take me on as an apprentice. And I promise I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to learn a trade, and I'm going to save my money, and I can prove to you that I can be a good boy, and I can keep the rules. And after I earn the money, then we'll have a discussion about whether I can come home. That's the way the audience expects that the story should end. That isn't the way the story ends.
That's the crux of what's going on here. This is the issue that Jesus is indirectly or on a slant addressing, that is in the minds of the teachers of the law that spoke at the beginning of the chapter, that were quoted at the beginning of the chapter. And so it's hugely significant to always keep that in mind. This challenge in the minds of the teachers of the law and the others that Jesus' idea of the doctrine of sin and what should be done about it isn't serious enough. And so, in the way he tells the story, I really love some of this angle of how the way he tells the story, he'll have them at some point here, he'll have them going, yeah, that's exactly what needs to happen. You know, the boy's got to make it right. He has to pay make up for his costs in work, make up for the pain that he's caused in work, and only then can the relationship be restored. And so you got to think about this. Like if Jesus had answered directly, propositionally, with a yes or a no, black and whitely, I would call it, that would have created a whole challenging situation and likely a crucifixion before God's time, because it would have been very upsetting or it would have created a massive argument. So, what does he do repeatedly, not just here? He answers with a narrative that carries a meaning that he's conveying, and the meaning that it's conveying is baffling to at least those who are invested in the law that got this all started. Bailey then begins by explaining how the father is in fact showing a costly offer of love when they meet. Particularly, he points out in the father spotting him before he can even come close to the town, and then his expression of love and emotion by taking on embarrassment in the way he goes out to meet him before he can be excluded from the boy can be excluded from the community. I'll let Bailey explain some of that himself as well.
And the father doesn't know. The costly offer of love is first, then we will look in a minute and see how the boy responds. What we need to notice is that the father takes upon himself the form of a suffering servant, and in public humiliation, he leaves the house, comes down and out, and goes after his boy. Exactly what the shepherd did when he left the flock and went after the lost sheep, and the woman did when she went down on her knees to search for the coin. The father is now coming after his boy, whom he's convinced is still lost. I call this the costly demonstration of unexpected love. All four words are critical.
The costly demonstration of unexpected love. That's how Bailey summarizes what's going on here. And that is what's going on here. It is extremely unusual, as has been stated before, for a father to behave in the way that this one did. But the behavior is a demonstration of the love and the willingness to pay a price to have that love known and expressed. Next is some consideration of what is going on for God as the Father depicted here, and some consideration of how the wayward son is going to respond. I will mention that I'm only picking a few selected highlights to emphasize. So there's a lot more in the original videos, and by all means, if you have the time and the interest, watch those in their complete form. But I have a purpose in mind for which I have selected some of these things, or to save you the time of watching it, just to emphasize a few things. The next clip is has an interesting idea in it of God reprocessing anger into grace, and I'm still not quite finished thinking about that. But here's that clip.
Now, when this costly demonstration, the deepest things cannot be spoken, they have to be acted. It is unexpected because he didn't deserve it or earn it, and its nature is love. For the father to do that, the father has to, before he makes that costly demonstration of love, he has to reprocess his anger into grace. To say that he's not angry that the boy told him to drop dead and sold the family farm is to say the guy isn't human. But he manages within the greatness of his own soul to reprocess his anger into grace. That's what Hosea says God does with Israel. I will not come with my fierce anger. I am God and not man. And that God is like a father, we're told, and comes with compassion. So the son is the recipient of this costly demonstration of unexpected love that is the result of the reprocessing of anger into grace. How is he going to respond? He can say, "It's okay, Dad, it's okay, thanks, but I'm going to make it up to you. Just give me it, let me get trained. I'll do anything. I'll shovel the manure, I'll fix the terraces, I'll repair the house, whatever job you need, you send me off for training and I'll come back and do it, and you can pay me like you do the others, and I'll get work elsewhere and I'll make it up to you." But you see, the issue is not the money. The issue is the father's broken heart. If this is a servant who stole money, all he's got to do is pay it back. If this is somebody who robbed the bank, he's got a chance to say, made a big mistake, I'm sorry. But if it is a loving father with a longing that there should be a relationship of love within a family, paying back the money is going to be a deeper insult because it's going to trivialize the problem. I insult you before the whole village today. How much shall I make out the check for? The very fact that you say you're going to make out the check means you don't understand what you've done. You have shamed your family before the entire community.
So Bailey doubles down on this lack of understanding on the part of the insolent son, but then also on the part of those who are waiting for him to be punished or to pay a price himself for what he has done, to slave his way out of it by returning to obedience. And that is just profound. When Bailey does talk about this God reprocessing anger into grace, I have difficulty with it. So I want to put that on the record. I prefer to think of, or I've grown up with the idea of God choosing to set his anger aside. So this is a new concept to me, that he reprocesses his anger into grace. Got to do more thinking about that someday. A few things though bear repeating on this, because in this segment, because it's so crucial. The key line that he speaks is that the issue is not the money. The issue is the father's broken heart, the broken relationship with the son. Relationship. So here we are. You can already start telling where I'm going to go in my application of this. But Jesus is using a story and narrative to
Now, when the
outline
older
how
son doesn't
connection,
say that third one,
reconnection
that
with
means
the
he
Father
gives up
can happen out of a
any
broken
hope that
relationship.
he
I'll
might
stop there.
solve the problem.
So what we have
He
here is a loving
surrenders, saying the
father
problem
with a
is I
longing
can't
that there
solve.
should be a relationship, a restored relationship. A broken relationship, broken on the one end, should be restored. That's his desire. That's his wish. Around the 26th minute, he says, just heard it, the very fact that you think you need to make a payment to undo the insult demonstrates that you do not understand. Bailey next goes to the son's actual response once he's seen the father's behavior. And he points out that the speech that he has prepared changes, and the third point gets dropped. And so it becomes, in that dropping, it becomes no longer about how he proposes to solve the problem. And the way Bailey puts it, the boy accepts being found, being recovered by the father. He accepts that the father has restored the relationship, is how I would put it as well. So here comes the last clip to begin to wrap this video up.
The only reason he was going to give the first two parts of the speech was because he wanted to soften up the old man to get a job. When that drops out, those two earlier phrases take on fresh meaning. He confesses that he has sinned before heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, period. He accepts to be found. He says, I now understand that I broke your heart. He doesn't get it until he sees his father getting hurt for him. When he was back in the house, before he left, that's what he request to take his inheritance. A new day wasn't just a root out of a dry ground. You can be very sure that there was a lot of yelling and shouting that led up to that. His father was offering him costly love from day one, but he never got it. He never got it until he saw his father's tears. When he saw his father getting hurt for him, all of a sudden the vision of the costly love breaks through to him, and he says, we've got a problem here I can't solve. And I'm not going to offer any bright ideas about how I am going to solve the problem. Now we have the God who comes to us in the form of a suffering servant with a new name, and that's Jesus Christ, offering costly love. The Son hears that. When he sees the costly nature of the love, it's possible for him to see the issue is not the money, the issue is the agony of rejected love. I can do nothing to solve this problem. All I can do is to accept the grace that is offered to me.
Bailey wraps that piece up pretty well himself. I'll emphasize again, the boy does not get it until he sees the father taking on pain, taking on hurt, taking on embarrassment for the boy's sake. We have a God who comes to us in the form of a suffering servant. But it's, in a way, it's a suffering father, a suffering boss as well. And so what needs to be understood is the agony of the father feeling his love for his son has been rejected throughout the whole thing. And yet throughout the whole story, this father has been offering grace, offering love. And the boy did not understand it until just now in the story, until he saw the pain his father was enduring. So, can a child, by obedience and slaving, repair their way out of a heartbreaking, heartbroken relationship with a parent? This boy came to a point where he realized he could not, and he appreciated the father fixing it for him. So they can't, the child can't fix it, but they sure appreciate if they recognize that the parent has repaired the situation at the parental expense.